양제 쳔보르소다 님미정 zonda monum 쳔보르간 디암타 방가로 다른 점도 실문 tumba deje janla ge jomzar.
The supreme, profound and wondrous Dharma is difficult to encounter even in millions of eons. Now that we have the chance to hear and receive it, may we realize the Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the Supreme Bodhicitta. We will now continue our teaching on entering the middle way, written by the Master Chandrakirti. This entire text covers the 10 bhumis of the bodhisattvas and the ultimate stage of Buddhahood. Regarding the 10 bhumis, it discusses the bhumis themselves and their respective qualities. It explains the first 5 bhumis, beginning with the first bhumi, supreme joy. Then it covers the 6th bhumi, the manifest bhumi, and the remaining bhumis, such as the 7th bhumi, Gonafar. The text is detailed in 3 structural outlines. We have already completed the first 5, starting with supreme joy. Today we begin the second outline, an explanation of the 6th bhumi, the manifest bhumi. This section on the 6th bhumi is further divided into a concise explanation of the subject, which is the nature of the bhumi itself, a detailed explanation of the object, which primarily covers emptiness, and a summary by explaining the qualities of the bhumi. It is organized into these 3 aspects. First, we discuss the nature of the bhumi, explaining why the 6th bhumi is called the manifest bhumi, why it's called manifest bhumi, and what distinguishes it from the other bhumis. This is very important.
Mundu shukbram nyamjag seone te zobasam te chula mun shukjang. Jiktim jonga tenyin thongwa te sherab nepe ngukba toparangir.
Abiding in meditative equipoise, all the qualities of perfect Buddhahood become manifest. Clearly seeing the reality of dependent origination, the Bodhisattva attains true cessation by abiding in wisdom. Here it is mainly mentioned that we are beginning our study of the 6th bhumi. In entering the middle way, the 6th bhumi focuses extensively on the prajna and shunyat, or perfection of wisdom, or emptiness. It utilizes logical reasoning to demonstrate the truth of emptiness. Therefore, this section contains a great deal of logical debate and analytical inference, proving that all phenomena are unarisen and empty. Thus, the 6th bhumi can be considered the core of the entire text and its most vital content. To begin, we should understand that the 6th bhumi, the manifest bhumi, is somewhat different from the first 5. Because in the first 5 bhumis, the bodhisattva has perfected the paramitas of giving, morality, patience, diligence, and meditation. These 5 paramitas are perfected. However, these 5 paramitas, if not supported by the perfection of wisdom, are not entirely complete, as we will discuss later. Therefore, it is mentioned here that the perfection of wisdom is supreme for a bodhisattva on the 6th bhumi. Now, why is it called the manifest bhumi? The text states abiding in meditative equipoise, because we have already discussed the completion of the paramita of meditative concentration upon reaching the 6th bhumi. The bodhisattva primarily abides in a state of meditative equipoise, where this direct absorption gives rise to the manifestation of all qualities of perfect Buddhahood. In this state, they clearly perceive the profound meaning of dependent origination and emptiness. Thus, both the nature and the concept of this bhumi are based on this realization. Why it is called the manifest bhumi? It is called the manifest bhumi because it is the stage where the truth of all phenomena, the unity of appearance and emptiness, is fully realized. At this stage, this realization becomes completely manifest. This is the primary focus here. Why is it called the manifest? There are 3 reasons. Of course, different great masters in Tibet offer various explanations. Some suggest 2 reasons, others suggest 3. But following the auto-commentary on entering the middle way, there are 3 reasons why it is called the manifest bhumi. What are they? The first is that all aspects of perfect enlightenment are present. The second is clearly seeing the reality of dependent origination. The third appears to be the last line, though many commentaries do not explicitly list it as such. What else is covered? It relates to the 5th bhumi, specifically the realization of the truth of the path at that stage. This is the core principle taught. So why is it called the manifest bhumi? Because at the 6th bhumi, the qualities of perfect enlightenment, such as the 10 powers, the 4 fearlessnesses, and the 18 unique qualities of a Buddha, all manifest very swiftly. The qualities of perfect enlightenment, all qualities of perfect Buddhahood, are becoming manifest at this stage. That is one reason. Because this stage is so pure, the many qualities of the perfection of wisdom arise naturally and manifestly. This is the first reason. The second reason is as stated, clearly seeing the reality of dependent origination. Upon reaching the sixth bhumi, one directly perceives that appearance is emptiness, and emptiness is appearance. Everything is pure and equal without duality. In the ultimate sense, they are non-dual and pure. In the relative sense, they are like dreams and illusions. Ultimate and relative truths are fully unified in manifestation and emptiness. This is the state that has been directly realized. Of course, when we were on the first bhumi, the stage of supreme joy, we also perceived this. But compared to the sixth bhumi, there is a difference in terms of significance. Thirdly, it is because the truth of the path becomes manifest here. This refers to the truth of the path that was taught when discussing the perfection of meditative concentration. It manifests here. For these three reasons, this is called the manifest bhumi. On this sixth bhumi, in what state does the bodhisattva abide? They abide in the stainless and utterly pure attainment of cessation. This state of attainment of cessation will also be discussed when we reach the seventh bhumi. This state of attainment of cessation is also different from that of the first bhumi. The second, third, and fourth bhumis also each have some meditative states of attainment of cessation, but these meditative states are entirely different from one another. Of course, this attainment of cessation does not mean it is the same quiescent Dharma accepted by the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. It is not that at all. So what is primarily taught about the sixth bhumi here? It is that qualities completely different from those of the previous bhumis manifest here. For this reason it is called the manifest bhumi. They also reside in a state of prajna wisdom and attainment of cessation, a state of non-dual wisdom realized by the sixth bhumi bodhisattva. Therefore it is called the manifest bhumi. Regarding this point, as I mentioned, there are three reasons. You can also refer to them later. In the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, when Master Fazun translated the text, he summarized these points as follows. First, because the qualities of perfect Buddhahood are manifest. Second, because the reality of dependent origination is directly perceived. And third, because the truth of the path is present. He listed these three reasons. For these three reasons, it is called the manifest bhumi. So this time I have prepared everything for you in advance, including the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way. This is the so-called auto-commentary written by Master Chandrakirti himself and translated by Master Fazun. I have heard that Khenpo Yeshe has also taught this, but I am not sure if he finished the teaching. The auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way is very important. Previously, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche taught this to us. I also personally received the transmission of this auto-commentary from His Holiness. So I hope that during our study of Entering the Middle Way, you will listen to the audio recordings and consult other materials. It is very important. But most importantly, read the commentary by Khenpo Depa carefully. It is neither too detailed nor too brief. At critical points, it discusses various viewpoints, and it provides explanations for every verse. When we indicate the section divisions below, you will find them already clearly marked. However, you may notice some slight differences from the Khenpo's commentary, which is otherwise well structured. For instance, in this particular section, the marker for gaining and attainment of cessation was placed above, when it should actually be below. Please expect such minor discrepancies occasionally. In reality, this commentary is not easy to understand. I spent a great deal of time on it between 2020 and 24, both translating and proofreading. It is not a text that can be grasped quickly. However, I believe that whenever we have the opportunity to study Entering the Middle Way without a reliable reference, it is difficult to gain a clear understanding. This is why the auto-commentary is so vital. The Indian commentaries themselves are profound, and added to that, Master Fazun's translation style from that era is archaic and can be challenging. By contrast, Khenpo Depa's commentary combines Mipim Rinpoche's topical outline with clear literal explanations. Furthermore, the Khenpo himself was a true realized master of the Middle Way. This is not just my personal opinion, it is well documented in the introductions to his works. Therefore, I believe that by using this text as a reference, you will be able to study much more effectively. In the past, we all know that everyone could gather together in a single hall or shrine room. However, our methods of study and contemplation have had to change, and I am adjusting accordingly. When I teach a text, I might be wearing winter clothes one moment, and summer clothes, the next changing backgrounds and settings constantly. I am constantly moving and adjusting. I hope that you as listeners can also adapt to different circumstances. Whether you are listening from a hotel, at home, at work, or at the monastery, you can learn in various environments. Regardless of the situation, the advantages of this technological era are something nothing can hold back. Even now, when we see restrictions on online resources like the Tripitaka, in this age of AI, trying to manually control information is not so simple. Therefore, at this time, do not let your opportunity for practice go to waste. Make every effort to continue your studies. We cannot expect to maintain a single lifestyle or format forever. That is impossible. The lifestyle, work habits, and survival circumstances of humanity are constantly changing. Since change is inevitable, we must adapt to the world and our environment. Adjusting ourselves accordingly is very important. So we begin the Sixth Bhumi, the manifest, today. This is highly significant. Just as I mentioned in the last session, I hope that as you progress through Madhyamaka, you start as an ordinary person, perhaps knowing nothing of emptiness, but by the time you complete the text, you will understand the nature of emptiness. This year is quite special. As I have said before, I have provided teachings on the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. Usually, one is reluctant to teach such profound emptiness to those who are not yet ready to receive it. Traditionally, such teachings were considered suitable only for those deeply moved by them. However, if I were to continue keeping it a secret, some people might never even have the opportunity to encounter such teachings. So, given the circumstances this year, many conditions have come together. This is a year of prajna. We have the opportunity to study the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, and the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. In summary, we are using many methods this year. I hope you do not let this opportunity for Dharma practice slip away. The karmic connection is already there, but some people make excuses. I'm too busy, I'm too tired, my health isn't good, I have too many affairs, I have family obstacles, my work doesn't allow it, and so on. There are countless excuses. If you don't strive to seek the Dharma and instead remain distracted, constantly playing with your phones, constantly feeding distraction and cutting off the very causes for practicing virtue, I think that is quite irrational. Although many of us are ordinary beings, we should still strive to draw closer to the truth. It is absolutely necessary to exert effort in this regard. Therefore, I hope that this year, during this year of prajna, you will all strive to learn. We often recite the Diamond Sutra, and I see that after studying it, many of you are eager to recite it. That is, in fact, our objective. When I was teaching the Diamond Sutra, I myself felt a strong desire to recite it frequently because I had taught the Sutra of the merits of the Diamond Sutra. It is the same with the Prajna Paramita Sutras. You may feel the same. When you listen to this teaching, you are deeply moved by its merits. When I teach it myself, I also come to deeply understand its significance, but as time passes, things may change. Regardless, there is a significant difference between listening and not listening, or studying and not studying. Everyone needs to make an effort. Next, we will present the detailed explanation of the object. This refers primarily to emptiness. This section is divided into two parts. First, an explanation of the excellence of emptiness, and second, the actual explanation of that emptiness. We begin with the first part, the excellence of emptiness.
Chirtir longwa tsokkan devlagda migda kiwag chikin dot pa yi yir de chippa television daryang le manyam yondan langde yanin ru.
Just as a person with sight can lead a multitude of blind people to their destination, so too does wisdom guide the sightless virtues and lead them to the fruit of Buddhahood. This verse emphasizes the vital importance of the wisdom of emptiness. Let us understand this through an analogy. I am quite pitiful myself these days, brewing my own tea. In the past, someone would always bring me a cup of tea. Now I have to brew it myself and carry my own computer and belongings. But the tea leaves are nothing special. Consider the analogy. A sighted person can guide countless blind people. Imagine a group of blind people in the world. Although they have hands and feet and a desire to reach a certain destination, they are completely unable to do so. Relying solely on their own efforts, they have no way to reach their goal. By the same token, if a sighted person begins to lead them, they can reach the destination they desire. This is the same principle. In the process of Mahayana practice, if we lack one thing, what are we missing? We are missing the wisdom, the prajna paramita. If you practice the paramitas of giving, morality, patience, diligence, and meditation, if these 5 parameters are not supported or held by the wisdom of prajna paramita, it is as if you are blind. As we discussed yesterday in the previous session, the 5 parameters are like the blind, and wisdom is like the eyes. Without eyes, you cannot reach your destination. We also find this stated in the wisdom chapter of the Bodhisattva. All these aspects were taught by the Buddha for the sake of wisdom. Shantadeva also said this. Therefore, if you possess the merits of the prajna paramita, then all these virtuous deeds can lead you to Buddhahood. But if you are not held by prajna paramita, you cannot reach the stage of Buddhahood. We often call the stage of Buddhahood the universal radiance. Thus, the prajna paramita is the most crucial element. With it, one can clearly discern the liberating path from that which leads to attachment and cyclic existence. As other sutras state, just as all rivers flow into the ocean, all the myriad practices of the 6 paramitas ultimately converge into the ocean of the wisdom of prajna paramita. This is why we emphasize that whatever practice we engage in, we need wisdom to sustain it. You should be aware of this. Whether you are prostrating, circumambulating, releasing life, burning incense, or worshipping the Buddha, are there merits in these? Yes, they have great merits. But if you do not understand emptiness, and you perform these acts without it, it becomes merely a virtue tending to happiness, which may at best lead to rebirth in the human or heavenly realms. Apart from that, there is no way to attain liberation. Once you truly realize the selflessness of persons and phenomena and sustain your practice with that wisdom, then even if you recite a single mantra of Avalokiteshvara or perform one prostration, all such merits will become the causes of liberation. Therefore, in our daily lives, as we discussed previously, entering the middle way primarily teaches emptiness. However, we must never disregard or destroy the virtuous roots of the relative level. If we do, it will be impossible to attain the 2 bodies of Buddhahood. If all our merits remain shackled by grasping a true existence, not only will we fail to attain liberation, we might instead fall into the lower realms. That is a real possibility. There were people in the past who recited mantras hundreds of millions of times, but because they were not sustained by wisdom and because they made distorted dedications, they ended up turning into demons. This is entirely possible. So regarding all other virtuous practices mentioned here, such as the 5 paramitas, in truth any virtuous act, if not sustained by the wisdom of emptiness, is like the actions of a blind person. A blind person can never reach the destination. By the same logic, are our virtuous acts good? Yes, they are far better than negative deeds. But they must be sustained by wisdom. This is truly essential. Even many who call themselves Mahayana Buddhists do not fully understand this. This is very important. In the Chinese tradition, when prostrating to the Buddha, we often reflect on how both the one who prostrates and the object of koto are empty. Similarly, when we engage in Chan meditation or reciting repentance prayers, there are special verses for this. I hope that many of you will realize that the nature of these relative virtuous practices is ultimately empty. If you understand the wisdom of emptiness, then in conventional reality, although you perform dreamlike virtuous deeds, you will also dedicate them in a dreamlike manner, wishing that dreamlike sentient beings may attain a dreamlike fruit. This is the supreme path and the best skillful means. Now the second part, an explanation of the emptiness endowed with such excellent qualities. This is divided into 3 sections: the method of explanation, the suitable vessels for the teaching, and the teachings themselves. This supreme emptiness is discussed in 3 ways. First, how is it explained? Did we not just say that the wisdom of emptiness is vital? It is like the eyes, like a clear vision. But how do we explain this emptiness? Especially the emptiness realized by the Sixth Bhumi Bodhisattva. How is it explained? In this regard, our auto-commentary explains it through a series of questions and answers. And how is it explained? It means that in our auto-commentary there is a question. Since the emptiness of dependent origination is so vital, what is this true emptiness like? What does a Sixth Bhumi Bodhisattva actually perceive? This is the question raised. Master Chandrakirti then responds, the truth of emptiness of dependent origination is indeed vital, but those whose eyes are clouded by the cataracts of ignorance cannot comprehend it. Only a Sixth Bhumi Bodhisattva can know it, so do not ask me. If you truly wish to know, ask those who possess stainless wisdom. Master Chandrakirti says this at the beginning of the auto-commentary. Regarding the realization of the Sixth Bhumi, do not ask me, what does this mean? Why does Master Chandrakirti speak this way? Actually, this is a display of humility. It signifies that in the future those who teach or compose treatises, they must follow the teachings of the Dharma in practice. They should rely on scriptural authority, logical reasoning, and the pith instructions of their spiritual teachers when teaching or composing treatises. Do not rely on your own ego, saying, I feel this is how it is, I think this is how it is. Writing or teaching with such arrogance is completely unreasonable. In truth, Master Chandrakirti was fully capable of explaining it, validating it through perfect logical proofs. He is the great master who once manifested milk from a painting of a cow. He certainly knew the meaning of these scriptures. He knew it perfectly. Why then did he not speak? He taught in this way in order to help sentient beings avoid arrogance and cultivate humility. So when teaching the Dharma or composing treatises, we must rely on valid scripture and reasoning, as well as the pith instructions of our masters. This is vital. Because some people nowadays, when teaching sutras or treatises, rely solely on their own conceptual thoughts to fabricate ideas or speak recklessly. This is truly unreasonable. This is why Tibetan Buddhism places such great importance on lineage. For instance, I received this teaching from a specific master, and I teach it just as he taught it. Maintaining this unbroken lineage is a responsible attitude toward future students. That is one aspect of the issue. There is another matter as well. The auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way explains that sutras like the Prajnaparamita Sutra and the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis have already described the emptiness realized at the Sixth Bhumi. So regarding this emptiness, why must we rely on scriptural evidence and reasoning? Shouldn't we just read the sutras ourselves? Can't we simply read sutras like the Shurangama Sutra, which discuss emptiness? Why is it necessary to rely on anything else? To this, Master Chandrakirti responds. What is his response? The fact is that the meaning of these sutras is very difficult for ordinary beings like us to fathom. Master Chandrakirti specifically states that for someone like him to attempt to explain the full meaning of the sutras is not possible, because the sutras contain teachings of ultimate meaning and expedient meaning, profound meanings and hidden intents. They are multi-layered and deep. Therefore, it is difficult for ordinary people to fully understand them. However, by relying on a person with valid cognition, someone as extraordinary as Nagarjuna, it is possible to understand the true meaning of the sutras by studying the treatises they have composed. One can truly grasp the perspective of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, but one must rely on someone. As we will see below, by relying on great masters like Nagarjuna, even I, Master Chandrakirti, might be able to express a part of it. Here, because Master Chandrakirti is such a great master, he explains the meaning of Madhyamaka by relying on Nagarjuna's perspective. He mentioned this at the very beginning, and near the end of the text he states once more, I am explaining this to you by relying on Nagarjuna's perspective. He constantly emphasizes this. Even though he was a great Indian Pandita, I once read in a book that Chandrakirti is included among the 84 Mahasiddhas of India. There is even a verse of prayer dedicated to him. It appears in the praises of the 84 Mahasiddhas. Although some lists of the Mahasiddhas may not explicitly include Chandrakirti, this is possible because there are different ways to calculate that number. Regardless, Chandrakirti is an extraordinary Mahasiddha. On the surface, it might seem that he could easily explain the sutras through his own power. Yet, Master Chandrakirti chooses to explain the scriptures by relying on Nagarjuna's teachings. Many of us might think, I will teach this sutra, I will teach that sutra, and teach based on a casual reading. Of course, if you want to teach, no one is going to stop you. But sometimes you have to ask yourself, do you actually have a lineage? Do you really understand the Mahayana Sutras? Because if you don't, and you're just explaining things based on your own imagination, that is to say, scriptures are not so easy to interpret. In Tibetan Buddhism, we tend to teach the treatises more, because there is a saying that without the commentaries of great masters, it is very difficult to interpret the Buddha's intent. The interpretations of later high-ranking masters are relatively more accessible. In Tibetan Buddhism, teaching the Dharma is not something done freely or casually. However, if there are commentaries from great masters, then interpretation is possible. In the future, when you teach sutras or treatises, it is best to use commentaries from masters of the past. I also try my best to rely on commentaries when translating, especially in the case of treatises composed in verse form. I always try to find a commentary that is accessible to provide a literal explanation, and then I find one that is more profound. For example, for the Treasury of Doha songs I am working on now, I found Mipam Rinpoche's literal commentary, as well as a difficult commentary by an Indian master named Advaya Vajara. In this way, when a treatise has two commentaries, its meaning can generally be well explained. For example, I have recently been working on the Treasury of Precious Qualities, where the omniscient Jigme Lingpa provides his own auto-commentary. Some time ago, there was another commentary by Alak Shatruk Rinpoche, but that commentary stopped halfway through. When I was translating the Treasury of Precious Qualities, I wasn't sure whether I would be able to complete it properly. Years ago, there was a Tibetan commentary that was translated for about 4 chapters before it also stopped. Last year, another commentary was translated for about 2 chapters. Now we are beginning the auto-commentary. I am not sure if we will be able to complete it. I hope the Dharma protectors grant their permission. I am just mentioning this in passing. My point is that when we study these treatises, we must be careful. When you teach the Dharma to others in the future, do not be too arrogant. Oh, there is nothing more to be said about this sutra. I have heard that in some past debates people would claim that Nagarjuna did not understand, or that Chandrakirti did not understand. If you think Chandrakirti didn't understand, but you do, if you claim to understand what Nagarjuna did not, then you truly are impressive. In the entire world today, it is Master Chandrakirti who most perfectly explains the true intent of Nagarjuna. I remember reading in a biography of Tsongkhapa that when Master Tsongkhapa personally met Manjushri, he asked, "Is Master Chandrakirti the only great being who correctly explains Nagarjuna?" Manjushri praised Tsongkhapa greatly, confirming that this is indeed true. To correctly interpret the Prajna Sutras and the definitive intent of Nagarjuna, one must look to Master Chandrakirti. Master Chandrakirti is a holy being who had already attained the highest stage in a higher realm, but he personally came to this Saha world to propagate Nagarjuna's teachings. He praised Chandrakirti's qualities extensively. This can be found in Tsongkhapa's writings. From everything I've read before, there is certainly a basis for this. I would not dare to speak of this in class without a scriptural basis. Now let us begin the verse. This verse is as follows.
Chirtir te chiu zab churtok ba longdang jiang rigpe yimbe na tertern pabak le zhong le chirtir ne bi liujin
Just as those who have realized the profound truth rely on scripture and reasoning, so I shall now expound this according to the treatises of Nagarjuna. He speaks of those who have realized. It refers to the Sixth Bhumi, the manifest bodhisattvas who perceive profound emptiness, which is free from the 4 extremes and 8 fabrications. But he says one needs a lineage. What lineage? Master Chandrakirti says it is relying on Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna completely understood the meaning of the sutras. In his treatises, such as the root stanzas of the Middle Way and the 60 stanzas on reasoning, the 6 reasoning texts, he explained the meaning of the Buddha's teachings. He used reasoning to ascertain the meaning of emptiness. Therefore I, Chandrakirti, have this confidence, relying on the pith instructions of Nagarjuna, to have the capability. I, Chandrakirti, am explaining this following the perspective of Nagarjuna, without addition or subtraction, free from any overstatement. He emphasizes that emptiness is not easy to understand. Only Nagarjuna can truly explain the Buddha's intent. I am explaining this relying on the intent of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna can understand it. How can Nagarjuna understand it? Nagarjuna can certainly explain the Buddha's sutras correctly. Why? Because the Buddha personally gave a prophecy in many Mahayana sutras. This is found in the Lankavatara Sutra that we have in Han regions. I have translated it directly. It says that when the Buddha was alive, he prophesied that in the future, in the south, in the land of Vidarbha, there would be an auspicious monk whose name would contain the syllable Naga. He would refute the extremes of existence and non-existence and propagate the Dharma. He would teach the Supreme Vehicle well and eventually attain the first Bhumi, supreme joy, and be reborn in the Pure Land. This is described in the Lankavatara Sutra. Also in the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis, the Buddha told Ananda, speaking of a youth named Joyful to All Beings. He was known by this name, Joyful to All Beings. This name appears in several other sutras. The Buddha prophesied that 400 years after his parinirvana, this youth would be reborn as a monk named Nagarjuna, who would extensively propagate the Buddha's teachings. Finally, he would attain Buddhahood in a supremely pure world with the name Tathagata of radiant wisdom. Furthermore, many other sutras such as the Great Drum Sutra and the Root Tantra of Manjushri have all prophesied that Nagarjuna would propagate the teachings left behind by the Buddha. These prophecies are very clear. Thus, we are very certain that Nagarjuna's explanations perfectly represent the Buddha's intent. And because Master Chandrakirti explains by relying on Nagarjuna's perspective, we can place our full trust and confidence in him. Everyone should understand this clearly. Next, we discuss the vessel for these teachings divided into two parts, identifying the suitable vessel and the benefits of hearing this path of emptiness. To encourage everyone to listen to this emptiness path, first let us identify the suitable vessel.
소수 제우티나 동반이 돈에 나다가라 양당 종라터 가비 가발레 쇼 묵님 치마난 리기와르 당으로 게르와 강임 바텔라 조바산게 로이 사모여 테니 예르 담비 노는데인데 텔라 담비 돈지 뎀바나 담브르샤. If
an ordinary being, upon hearing the teachings on emptiness, experiences joy again and again in their heart, with tears flowing from joy and their hair standing on end, such people possess the seed of perfect Buddhahood. They are suitable vessels for the teaching of the ultimate truth. To them the ultimate truth should be taught, whose characteristics are explained below. We often cite this passage, you should be aware of this. In fact, regarding this prajna emptiness, when we discuss the first Bhumi, is it something that everyone can listen to? Just like the esoteric teachings, it is not meant for everyone. Because if some people hear about emptiness and cannot accept it, they may develop wrong views and ultimately fall into the lower realms. There are also some who hear of emptiness and mistake it for simple emptiness, meaning nothing exists at all. They fall into the view of nihilism. Others see prajna as some kind of substantial emptiness. These people also cannot attain liberation, therefore emptiness cannot be taught indiscriminately to everyone. So who should we teach it to? Actually, those who listen to emptiness generally fall into two categories. One type is more emotional. As the verse describes, when they hear of emptiness, they feel joy in their hearts and show physical signs of it. These people can be taught. Another type is more sharp-witted. They might not show outward emotional reactions, but as we explain the reasoning of the Sixth Bhumi, the manifest, that phenomena do not arise from themselves, nor arise from another, nor from both, nor without a cause. When they analyze this, they develop joy through logic. They realize it through reason. Such people can also be taught. So it is not that if you cannot weep, you cannot hear emptiness. That is not the case. Otherwise, when teaching emptiness, we would have to interview everyone to see if they can cry. That would be quite troublesome. But indeed, some people, including many of our fellow practitioners, feel a deep connection upon hearing of emptiness. They feel it is especially meaningful. At that moment, their Mahayana lineage from past lives awakens. These individuals are the suitable vessels for prajna. They feel immense joy the moment they hear about emptiness. Others, upon hearing of prajna, find it very difficult to accept, just as in the story of the two monks in the words of my perfect teacher, or as described in the sutras. Once when the Buddha was teaching prajna, 500 monks could not accept it and vomited blood and later left. So there are all kinds of responses. Therefore here, when we explain emptiness, some people have a strong grasping toward internal and external phenomena. We use logical reasoning to dispel their wrong views. There is another way, through the three excellent principles, as we teach in the words of my perfect teacher, gradually guiding them to meditate on emptiness, or through the direct pointing out of the mind in Chan, or the direct instructions in the esoteric teachings. Through gradual practice, another person is just as described here. Their Mahayana lineage is awakened. From the very beginning they seem to accept it directly and feel especially joyful toward this prajna emptiness. Such situations do exist. Regardless, when the text says ordinary beings, it refers to those who have not yet attained any spiritual realizations. When they hear the teaching of prajna emptiness, that all phenomena are empty, that all phenomena are unarisen and beyond reach, their hearts are filled with repeated joy. As Master Tsongkhapa notes in his commentary, this joy arises not only from hearing the teachings, but also from contemplating them. As they contemplate the meaning of emptiness, they also experience great joy. Of course, if you only hear it without practice or without understanding the underlying meaning, you might easily lose your way. But if you truly understand the meaning of emptiness, you will experience immense joy. This is primarily a reaction of the mind. As the heart generates this joy, physical signs appear as well. Tears of joy may flow, or the hairs on one's body may stand on end. It is a profound sense of joy. Just as Milarepa felt upon hearing his master's name, some people, upon encountering Mahayana Dharma, feel an intense sense of familiarity. These individuals possess the seeds of Mahayana wisdom. They need no further vetting. They are suitable vessels for emptiness. One can teach them the meaning of emptiness as found in our study of the Sixth Bhumi, the manifest. They have profound karmic links. Therefore, such people are ready to learn. In general, having faith and understanding in the Mahayana teachings and emptiness is vital. As stated in the Yuttatantra Shastra, among the 4 causes of a bodhisattva, faith and understanding in the Mahayana or emptiness is essential. The ornament of the Mahayana Sutras also emphasizes the necessity of this faith. So here I am emphasizing that if one feels a deep connection to the path of emptiness and possesses such faith, they do not need to be vetted further. We can directly teach them the characteristics of the ultimate truth of emptiness, taught in the Sixth Bhumi, the manifest, because they will certainly put it into practice. In a sense, such people can be taught directly without hesitation. However, if someone is indifferent to Mahayana or specifically feels fear or repulsion toward the path of emptiness, we must be cautious. Otherwise, teaching them will not necessarily be effective. Therefore, before teaching the Sixth Bhumi, the text identifies the suitable vessel for prajna. As we just mentioned, those who have deep responses to emptiness and feel great joy in their hearts are the ones we must teach. Many of us indeed possess faith in prajna. On the other hand, for those who harbor doubts about Buddhist teachings, as the 400 stanzas on the middle way says, sometimes you can teach them emptiness directly. When you explain emptiness directly, they may find it very easy to develop faith in the Buddha's teachings. Why? Oh, so all phenomena are empty. What the Buddha taught is truly perfect. They develop faith immediately. Many of our fellow practitioners began by studying the root stanzas of the middle way. Some lay practitioners in Beijing, for instance, without even listening to the words of my perfect teacher or the way of the Bodhisattva, began directly with the root stanzas of the middle way. Initially, I told them, do not listen to this yet, otherwise you'll negate everything. It negates the inherent existence of the Tathagata, afflictions, and virtuous roots. That can be a bit overwhelming. It is better to build a foundation first and then realize that these manifestations are ultimately ungraspable. Teaching from the top down may be a bit confusing, but later it seemed they developed faith in the prajna teachings. However, their order of study was a bit disorganized. They began with the root stanzas of the middle way, and only 5 or 6 years later, after negating all phenomena, did they start studying the way of the Bodhisattva and the words of my perfect teacher. Logically speaking, one should study the way of the Bodhisattva and the words of my perfect teacher, and only then use the root stanzas of the middle way to negate those remaining grasps. That would be more effective. In the future, our order of study might be, first the words of my perfect teacher, establishing a firm foundation in relative truths like karma, and once these worldly right views are well established, then go on to entering the middle way and the root stanzas of the middle way. This order seems much better. We will see how it goes. Next, the text discusses the benefits of hearing the path of emptiness. It is divided into 2 parts, developing the relative benefits of skillful means and developing the ultimate benefits of wisdom. In other words, if we wish to study emptiness because this emptiness is so supreme, we will naturally cultivate relative benefits as a means to hear the Dharma. To study the middle way, we will do whatever it takes, whether it is accumulating merit or other relative practices. I am determined to study the middle way, life after life. I seek this teaching of the unity of ultimate emptiness and relative manifestation. The essential meaning here is this: I seek both relative and ultimate Dharma with the sole purpose of studying or hearing about emptiness. Next, the first of the 2 outline the logic of developing relative skillful means. I memorized this commentary on entering the middle way back in 1986. I did it in Mount Wutayan at a monastery in Barkam. I had forgotten some of the verses in the middle, but as I recite them now, the places where I memorized them come back to me. I remember where I memorized each one. It has been several years since I last recited them. Those who are such vessels naturally develop many virtues, steadfastly uphold pure morality, diligently practice generosity, and cultivate patience in order to liberate sentient beings. They dedicate all roots of virtue to great enlightenment and revere all bodhisattvas. As I said, to study and hear about emptiness, I will exert every effort to become a vessel for emptiness that generates various merits. I will be very diligent in what? In the 6 areas mentioned here. First, steadfastly uphold pure morality. Listening to the teachings on emptiness is not just for 1 or 2 lifetimes. It requires cultivation over countless lifetimes. If I wish to attain it lifetime after lifetime, I must maintain pure morality. Without pure morality, I may not even attain a human rebirth in the future. If I do not have a human rebirth, I may lose the opportunity to hear of emptiness entirely. Therefore, with right mindfulness and awareness, I will not break my vows. I am determined to uphold pure morality. This is the first. Second, if I uphold morality, I can attain the teachings of emptiness for a lifetime or 2, but I also need to accumulate merit. Without accumulating merit, when the time comes for me to hear the teachings on emptiness, I may lack even the basic necessities such as travel expenses or daily living costs. If I am too poor, how can I hear of emptiness? Being too poor is also a problem. Even abroad, when attending Dharma teachings, if you are too poor, you may not even be able to afford the admission fee. In the past at our academy, if someone was too poor, they couldn't even afford travel expenses. They had no place to stay, so they could not attend the teachings. They barely knew where their next meal would come from. There is a saying, working for the next meal in the mountains, working for the next meal by the sea. If one is too poor, it does not work. Therefore, to hear of emptiness, one must diligently practice generosity. This is the second point. Then, if you only have morality and generosity, you must still cultivate patience. Without practicing patience, you will harbor anger every day. And if you harbor anger, you may end up with an ugly appearance and lack all other virtues. At that point, even a spiritual teacher may not be pleased, and you will constantly destroy your own roots of virtue and be reborn in the lower realms. The holy beings will not be pleased, and you will have no opportunity to hear of emptiness. Therefore, I must cultivate patience. Those who have cultivated patience in the past, or those among our Dharma friends who are patient, are more likely to have the opportunity to hear the Dharma. If you are always losing your temper and harboring anger, you will no longer be welcome in the ranks of those hearing the Dharma. You are constantly disharmonious. In our academy, we must be harmonious. Those who are not harmonious will be expelled. So if you harbor anger every day, you may even break your samaya with your Vajra brother and sister, which is a consequence you cannot afford. Third, one must practice patience and cultivate compassion. Yes, we just covered patience. Next, the third point is cultivating compassion. When we listen to Mahayana teachings on emptiness, we must cultivate Mahayana compassion. If we do not, and instead follow a lesser path, I might be reborn as a Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha, or among those who do not understand emptiness. If they do not understand emptiness, how could I hear the teachings? Therefore, I must begin cultivating Mahayana compassion now. With Mahayana compassion, I will encounter genuine Mahayana spiritual teachers in the future. I will have the right environment and resources. As for the fourth point, practicing patience, I have already explained it. Without practicing patience, one cannot remain in the community, nor can one progress. If I have an ugly appearance or lack proper faculties, I might not even find a spiritual teacher. Especially if I am not physically whole, it may be difficult to stay within the Sangha or join the ranks of those listening to Mahayana teachings. It is impossible. This is the fourth point. Fifth, to benefit sentient beings, we must dedicate all roots of virtue to enlightenment. If not, the merits will be exhausted after one use. If they do not grow continuously, I will not be able to hear of emptiness life after life. I might hear it in this life, but not necessarily in the next. So I must constantly practice virtue and dedicate these merits to the benefit of all sentient beings. Sixth, respect all bodhisattvas, the spiritual teachers who have generated bodhicitta. I must show them respect. Is this conflicting with what I said before? Not necessarily. For example, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, or ordinary spiritual mentors cannot teach the teachings of dependent origination and emptiness. So practicing compassion is not exclusive to Mahayana, but we must continuously cultivate great compassion within our mind stream. We cannot abandon sentient beings. If we abandon them, we will never become holders of the Mahayana lineage. That is another way to explain it. I must practice compassion. If I have no compassion, if I am always holding wrong views or harming beings, I may not have the chance to practice Mahayana in the future. That is the perspective we should take. This means that when we practice prajna emptiness, the virtuous roots of the relative level will continuously grow. As everyone knows, all phenomena are empty, and this is a principle we must understand. At the same time, one must understand that emptiness and manifestation are non-dual. Realize all phenomena as empty, yet rely on cause and effect. How marvelous, how miraculous. This means that, as stated in the commentary on bodhicitta, if we realize that all phenomena are empty, it is precisely because of this emptiness that the law of cause and effect remains valid. Conversely, because of cause and effect, all phenomena are empty. This is dependent origination. We often speak of dependent origination and emptiness. Because of this nature, the non-duality of appearance and emptiness, as well as cause and effect, can be established. As the Heart Sutra says, form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. All of these principles are perfectly logical. If this were not the case, phenomena could not possibly appear as they do. Therefore, while we realize emptiness and understand the importance of this truth, we must simultaneously recognize the infallible nature of cause and effect. These relative laws and principles are absolutely indispensable. These two aspects must be complementary. It is incorrect to seek only emptiness or to seek only worldly substantial phenomena. Both extremes are completely wrong. So when studying entering to the middle way, you must truly understand dependent origination and emptiness. You must grasp this meaning. When we seek emptiness, we are not falling into a blank state, where everything becomes nothingness. Nowadays, many fall into the mistaken views of Wild Chan, claiming that nothing exists. They say even good and evil do not exist. Such wild claims are truly terrifying. We must avoid that. Even if your view is profound, you must still properly observe cause and effect in your actions. You must genuinely practice virtuous deeds. These two are not contradictory at all. In fact, they must be practiced together, because the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom are inseparable and must be united. This point is absolutely crucial. Therefore, when we teach prajna emptiness here, we are simultaneously fostering relative roots of virtue. These relative roots of virtue will continuously grow alongside our wisdom. Next is the second part, developing the merit of ultimate wisdom. Gaining mastery of the profound and vast ways, such persons will gradually attain the stage of supreme joy. Those who seek this should listen to this path. Now we will discuss this point. We just covered the relative merits, and when we seek prajna emptiness, we must never abandon these relative merits. Now we turn to the ultimate merit, which refers to the profound truth of emptiness. This is equally crucial. Therefore, by continuously accumulating roots of virtue over a long period while constantly practicing wholesome deeds, one gradually gains mastery of the profound and vast ways. Such great bodhisattvas fully realize profound emptiness together with the vast practices of relative truth. They perfectly harmonize the two truths. They never regard the ultimate truth as superior or the relative truth as inferior, nor do they claim that the ultimate truth is primary while the relative truth is secondary. They make no such distinctions. From the stage of an ordinary being all the way to the stage of a noble one, they always maintain the unity of appearance and emptiness. They completely understand this principle. They are highly proficient in both the profound and the vast teachings. I hope I didn't miss any part of the oral transmission recitation. Let's continue. Such individuals will progress gradually. They will first enter the path of accumulation and then the path of preparation. During these two paths, they practice the unity of appearance and emptiness. They do not fall into a state of mere emptiness, nor do they attach to some permanent and unchanging phenomenon. They avoid this and instead maintain the unity of appearance and emptiness. They do the exact same during the path of preparation. Then they attain the first bhumi, the supreme joy. What happens after attaining this stage? They gain a profound understanding, exactly as Nagarjuna taught in the root stanzas of the Middle Way, realizing the truth that all phenomena neither arise nor cease. They comprehend this deeply. And this very truth is exactly what is explained in our current text, Entering the Middle Way. Therefore, if you wish to completely master the relative and the ultimate, or emptiness and skillful means, and understand how these two are completely inseparable, you must progress gradually. First through the path of accumulation, then the path of preparation, and finally reaching the first bhumi. So I must emphasize, anyone seeking such a realization must begin their practice with this very treatise. Of course, in the middle of this treatise, it draws upon the perspective of the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis to discuss concepts like the 10 equalities. Regardless of how it is explained, the absolute core content of our treatise, which we will discuss next, is this principle. Phenomena do not arise from themselves, nor do they arise from others. They do not arise from both, nor do they arise without a cause. Therefore we know they are unarisen. This teaching encompasses the entirety of Entering the Middle Way and represents the complete meaning of the Sixth Bhumi. At the very beginning of the root stanzas of the Middle Way, Nagarjuna explains that phenomena do not arise from themselves, nor do they arise from others, nor do they arise from both, nor do they arise without a cause. They are unborn, and being unborn means they are empty. Starting perhaps from our next class, we will constantly speak of this non-arising. In our daily lives, we certainly see things arising. A mother gives birth to a child, and a seed produces a sprout. A yak produces milk, and so on. Arising is a common phenomenon in our world. Even I have a birth date and celebrate a birthday. However, as we will learn in the next class, all these forms of arising are completely illusory. Such arising is impossible and does not truly exist. If there is no arising, there can be no abiding, and without abiding, there is no cessation. Arising, abiding, and cessation are the characteristics of conditioned phenomena, but they are merely conceptual imputations. Therefore, when we study the Middle Way, our main task is to refute these concepts. This refutation does not rely simply on faith. We do not believe it just because Nagarjuna explained it well or because we wish it to be so. Here we completely rely on reasoning to negate these concepts. It is not a matter of accepting it just because a master said so, or because Nagarjuna said so, or because Chandrakirti said so. We do not rely on such an emotional approach. Instead, we use our own wisdom to analyze whether phenomena truly arise. Do they arise from themselves, from others, from both, or without a cause? If these four modes of arising do not exist, is there any other way things could arise? There is no fifth mode of arising. Thus, within the Middle Way teachings, the verse cited by Khenpo Sodargye that I just quoted is extremely important. No internal or external phenomenon can ever truly arise in any place, in any world, or according to any philosophical school. True arising is simply impossible. Of course, when we first say that nothing arises, many people find this impossible to accept. They say they have seen things arise with their own eyes. But this arising is merely an appearance at the conventional level. In reality, phenomena have never arisen. This truth has been demonstrated through exceptionally rigorous reasoning in both India and Tibet. It is taught with profound reasoning. In Tibet, the Prasangika and Svatantrika schools of the Middle Way have various ways of debating and establishing their reasoning. The omniscient Mipam Rinpoche explained this brilliantly in his commentary on the ornament of the Middle Way. Those of us who have studied that commentary or the root stanzas of the Middle Way generally understand this. However, Entering the Middle Way primarily uses the analysis of the four extremes to refute the arising of all phenomena. We all know this approach of analyzing the four extremes. So those who have not heard this before must be well prepared to see how phenomena are refuted. We clearly feel that things arise in the world. As I mentioned in a previous class, many modern materialist theories, whether mechanical materialism, various forms of materialism, as well as dualistic theories, consistently argue that the mind is produced by the brain. But the idea that the brain produces the mind cannot be established on either the ultimate or the relative level. We can confidently say this. Ultimately, it does not arise from itself, from others, from both, or without a cause, as we will analyze during our next refutation. Then we must ask if it arises relatively. If something arises relatively, we can accept it at the relative level. For instance, smoke arising from fire or a sprout arising from a seed are valid at the relative level. But as for the mind arising from the brain, up to now, has any scientist at all actually witnessed this directly? If they have not seen it with their own eyes, they cannot prove it. Scientists typically rely heavily on data. For example, to prove that smoke comes from fire, they conduct hundreds and thousands of repeated tests. After countless experiments and verifications, they conclude that all smoke originates from fire. It cannot come from anywhere else. This conclusion is backed by extensive data. This is the most important foundation for a scientist. But up to now, regarding the claim that the brain produces the mind, there is no conclusive evidence. Without data, such a claim is very difficult to establish. For scientists, this remains a mere hypothesis, and they do not accept mere hypotheses as fact. So, is there a relationship between the mind and the brain? There is indeed a relationship. For example, when there is a problem with my brain, problems also arise in my mind. However, this relationship is not necessarily that of the producer and the produced. This is a very important point. If there is no relationship of producer and produced, you cannot claim that the mind is generated there. Yet in many textbooks today, children are taught to believe that the mind is produced by the brain. But if the mind were truly produced by the brain, you must have either seen it with your own eyes, or some scientist must have truly discovered the mind being produced within the brain. In reality, scientists have not actually done so. Up to now, you probably will not find any book containing a claim of such a genuine discovery. Because many modern scientists, when it comes to consciousness and the mind, readily admit themselves that their understanding remains quite vague. They deeply wish to understand human consciousness, but regarding certain mental experiences, for instance, when people fall deeply in love, or when they watch the sunlight on the ocean and feel a profound sense of joy in their hearts, or when they hear the teachings on emptiness and feel repeated waves of delight, as to why these reactions occur, scientists themselves do not know. They might suggest that under certain conditions, some specific part of the brain is stimulated. They speak using words of mere possibility. However, this language of possibility means the theory cannot be truly established. For something to be truly established, it cannot be just a possibility. It must be a certainty. So I am just mentioning this in passing. Because nowadays many aspects of mainstream culture conflict with Buddhist teachings. There are certain profound principles that some people only half understand. And such vague understanding can have negative consequences. This is the main point I want to make. In the past, when teaching the wish-fulfilling treasury, I touched upon this briefly. This includes topics like the theory that humans evolved from apes. That was a mainstream cultural belief of the time. Although it has become the mainstream view today, a mainstream view is not necessarily correct. Just because the majority of people at a certain period in time have adopted such a culture and everyone believes it, regardless of whether it is officially recognized or endorsed by individual scholars, we must ask if these scholars have any genuine proof. We should question that. So this is just something extra I wanted to add in passing. In summary, starting from our next class, we will constantly be talking about non-arising. We will see if you all get tired of it. Some people amidst all this talk of non-arising might actually realize emptiness. Others might feel exhausted every day, thinking, today it's non-arising, tomorrow it's non-arising. What does it all mean? That's entirely possible. Regardless of what happens, we will just take it one step at a time, all right? That's all for today.
Bandara